Good afternoon, everyone. I am Mark Bernstein, Chair of the Rob and Melanie Walton Sustainability Solution Service at Arizona State University. Thank you for joining us today. From all of us here, we hope you and your family, friends, and colleagues are all well. I'd like to thank our partners, ASU's Virginia Piper Center for Creative Writing, ASU's Center for Science and Imagination, and the Changing Hands Bookstore located in Phoenix and Tempe. Thank you all for participating with us today. There's going to be some interaction with you, the audience. We're going to do a couple of polls. You'll also see a little Q&A box down at the bottom on the right-hand side of your Zoom link. There you can ask questions of the panelists as we move forward. As part of ASU's Global Futures Laboratory, the Solution Service uses the research and skills of our over 500 sustainability faculty to equip our partners, including companies, governments, and other institutions, with the tools and knowledge to implement leading-edge sustainability solutions for the future we need. One of those solutions is circularity, or the circular economy, which is what our session is about today. So before we start the session, I'd like to ask a poll of the audience. And I'll have Tim pop up the poll and ask you if you know what circular economy is. So feel free to pop in an answer. There is no correct one. Yes, you know what circular economy means. Yes, I heard the term, but wasn't sure what it meant. And no, I'd not heard that term. Give you a moment to pop in some answers. Of course, I'm very excited about our program today. While waiting for you, it merges literature with real life issues, something our partners have been doing for a while. Our guest speaker today is Johanna Stoberock, the author of Pigs. And I'll start with a quick story on how I found her book. But before that, let's see, do we have results? Well, that's good. So we have about half of you know the term, half of you have heard it, but don't know it. That's a great way to start. Thanks, everybody. And we'll keep polling later on. So let me tell you a quick story about how I found the book. It was the old-fashioned way. I was with my daughter-in-law in Manhattan, last year, of course, browsing through an independent bookstore, and the cover caught my eye. Since she was young, my daughter always loved pigs, not to eat them, by the way. So I thought I would take a look. Of course, I turned it over, looked at the back description, and the first couple of sentences really reached out at me. And I'll paraphrase a bit. It said, 4 children live on an island where all the world's trash floats ashore, and they feed it to a herd of pigs. But when a barrel washes ashore with a boy inside, the children must decide whether he is trash or one of them. That really resonated with me because of the work we were doing. Then after reading the book, I knew that the messages that Johanna wrote in the book were relevant for us and everyone concerned about these issues. So I reached out to see if she would join us on a virtual book reading and panel, and I'm so glad that she agreed. So I'm pleased to welcome Johanna Stoberock, award-winning author and teacher, to talk about pigs. Welcome, Johanna.
Thank you for the introduction, Mark, and thank you for having me here today. I'm so grateful to all of the organizations that are involved in supporting this event. But I particularly want to thank Changing Hands and to thank independent bookstores nationwide that have done so much in helping pigs find readers. There are no greater friends to writers than independent bookstores, and it's vital to the vibrancy and diversity of the literary scene that independent bookstores are still able to do their work during this current situation and that they're able to reopen when the situation changes. I very much hope to visit Changing Hands in person someday, and I will certainly order a book from them today. I hadn't heard the term circular economy before Mark got in touch with me, and it's been fascinating to discover that so many of the ideas and concerns I was thinking about while writing Pigs have been theorized with such concreteness in a field that at first glance does not seem very close to literary production. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to put Pigs, which takes place in an imagined world, in conversation with ideas that extend deeply into the systems present in the actual world. Pigs is intimately concerned with how we create and dispose of waste, and also with the intersections between how we care for our planet and how we care for its people. As Mark said, it follows the lives of 4 children who live on an island that serves as a receptacle for the entire world's trash. I thought what I'd do today is read from the very beginning of the novel to give you a sense of its world, of its setting, and its tone. Then I thought I'd read from a little further on in the novel to introduce you to its secondary character, a middle-aged castaway named Otis. And then I thought I'd close with a series of very, very short chapters that think in particular about the things we throw away. So each chunk of the reading will be about 5 minutes. The pigs ate everything. Kitchen scraps, bitter lettuce from the garden, the stale and sticky contents of lunch boxes kids brought home from school, toenail clippings, hairballs pulled up from the drain. After the pigs were done, there weren't even any teeth left over, not even any metal from cavities filled long ago. They lived in a pen out back. The land was rocky but spacious, and the pen had been tucked in a corner out of sight for more years than any of the children could remember. It was made out of wood, gray splintered boards nailed together in a haphazard way. Every 5 feet, the wood was anchored by posts. When you stood by the fence, the pigs lumbered over, grunting, and stuck their snouts out between the rickety slats. It wasn't always that they expected food. Sometimes they just wanted their snouts scratched. Sometimes they just grunted happily and settled back down in the shade. There were 6 of them. They never fought. They seemed to smile when you approached, but you had to be quick. If you brought a bucket of slop and poured it out too slowly without moving your hand away, you never knew what could happen. Louisa was missing a finger. Not an important one, just her left hand pinky where she hadn't moved away quickly enough one hot summer afternoon when she was feeding them shoes. It was summer every afternoon there, soft and lazy and slow. The pinky came off in one clean bite before she even realized what was happening. She left with a feeling of shame, like it had been her fault the pig grabbed her finger. She wrapped her hand in her skirt and kept her mouth shut, and the stub didn't start hurting until she lay down for the night. The land was actually an island. The island was surrounded by water that glinted green in the sun and clouded to gray in the shade. Some might have let the pigs run free, feral among the scrubby bushes. The pigs could have rooted happily for mushrooms or truffles, found entire brambles of berries to eat, and maybe left the children alone. They could have gobbled up the entire world's detritus without anyone's help. But the grown-ups preferred the pigs confined. They preferred the relative safety of the fence. Louisa had lived on the island forever, or for as long as she could remember, which was the same as forever. There were other children too, 3 of them. Andrew, who sang in his sleep and had straw-colored hair. Mimi, who was older, or at least taller than the rest, and who liked to pretend she knew much more about the world than anyone else, and who couldn't grow her hair long, no matter how hard she tried. There was even a toddler. They called her Natasha. Her head was covered with loose blonde curls. She couldn't have been more than 3, and she giggled every time she heard the grunting of the pigs. They were all afraid of the gray water, of the sea in a mood of despair. It wrapped the island like a scarf made of grief. It made you choke with tears to touch it. It didn't take long for Louisa's finger to heal into a nice, neat stump. She rubbed it sometimes and whispered to herself that it was time to grow up and stop being so clumsy. It was her fault she'd lost her finger. The pigs were fast, but if she'd been a little more agile, they'd have snapped at air. She wondered what she'd tasted like. She hoped she tasted good, but not so good that the pig would want more. She tried to remember which one it was that had snapped at her, but even though she was pretty sure it was the one with black spots, she wasn't sure enough to say. Sometimes the children tested what the pigs would eat. The leather flaps of shoe tongues, the bent frames of glasses, Mardi Gras beads, tin cans, pistols, cap guns. There seemed to be no limit to their appetite. The children would stand a few feet away from the fence and tossed whatever they were testing high into the air. The pigs moved with an unexpected grace, opening their long mouths and catching whatever came sailing down directly between their teeth. The pigs were remarkable. The children watched them with amazement, their own mouths open, their hands now empty, coming together of their own will to clap. Hubcaps, the tassels off bicycle handlebars, empty jars of mayonnaise, gone, all gone in seconds. The grown-ups on the island frowned at the children and never even pretended to help them with their chores. They drank espresso and smoked cigarettes and plugged their noses dramatically whenever the children got too close. As far as the children could tell, the grown-ups never cooked. When Natasha fell into the gray water and came up covered in spots and filled with an unquenchable thirst for a parent that even Mimi couldn't solve, the grown-ups flinched at the sight of her. "What are they here for?" Louisa said. Sometimes she thought, maybe we should just feed them to the pigs. Ships passed by from time to time, usually large cargo ships, but sometimes ocean liners. It was possible the island looked beautiful from a distance. When a ship edged onto the horizon, the children ran to the top of the highest rock and waved. They made Andrew take his shirt off and Mimi circled it above her head. They didn't shout. They knew their voices weren't strong enough to carry all that way, and they didn't really want the grown-ups to hear them. Not that the grown-ups had ever shown they'd cared. But this was private, and they'd agreed to do it in silence. Only once it seemed that they'd been sighted, but the only difference it made was that a barrel washed up on shore instead of the usual junk. They spent an entire day trying to pry it open, and when they finally got inside, all they found was another child, sleeping. His name was Eddie. So that's the very beginning of the novel. But along with the children, there's another character who's central to the novel's plot, a middle-aged castaway named Otis. And he shows up in the island in the second chapter. I named him Otis because it kind of sounded like Odysseus. And when I was trying to figure out what the novel actually was, I thought maybe the island was another island that Odysseus wandered into during his voyage home. But I was also really happy that his name echoed the elevator brand, because it turns out that elevators are more often repaired than they are thrown away. And I think of Otis as a character whose impulse is kind of to throw himself away, and that his journey in the novel is a way to move towards repair. He's the character that I feel closest to. He arrives on the island and thinks he's going to help the children, but he just keeps messing up over and over and over. So I thought I'd read a section from about halfway through the book where he messes up once again. He refuses to believe the children when they tell him that the ocean is toxic, and instead he decides to go for a swim. Otis swam what he thought of as laps, using 2 rocks on the shore to mark the boundaries of his route. He'd taken his son for lessons from the time the kid was barely more than a baby. He remembered watching him toddle across the tiles in a swim diaper and goggles, towel draped around his neck. He remembered climbing down the ladder into the chest-high water at the YMCA, the water just a little too cold, lining up with a bunch of other parents, mostly mothers, and then holding his arms out for his son to step into from the humid edge. He remembered all the other kids giggling and eagerly reaching for the water, and his own son too scared to even get close enough to take his father's hands. That's what those kids on the shore were like. They were like his son at swim lessons, too scared to believe there was actually freedom in taking your feet off the ground. Something hit his leg. A Barbie doll with her left arm missing. He grabbed her and flung her by her legs. The doll soared above the water, blonde hair streaming, and landed close to shore. His hand stung a bit when he put it back in the water. There must have been something on the hard plastic body. The sting spread to his leg where she'd nudged against him in the first place. He felt like throwing up. He looked back at the shore. The children were no longer staring at him. They weren't sitting in a line anymore. In fact, from the water, he could only see Andrew. He was sweeping around the campfire, tidying up after breakfast. Otis couldn't say for sure, but he had the feeling that Andrew wasn't looking at him on purpose, that he was concentrating a little too hard on sweeping, which is not a task that takes a great deal of concentration in the first place, particularly when you're basically just tidying up dirt. Otis treaded water and watched Andrew and wondered where the other kids had gone. A wave hit him in the back of the head. He ducked underwater, and when he surfaced, his head was itching. Not just itching. It was like a nest of ants had colonized his scalp and his beard and between his toes. Another wave hit him. For a few seconds, he felt okay under the water, but when he surfaced again, the itching had turned to burning. The feeling that he needed to throw up had turned to actual retching in the water. He reached up to scratch his head and pulled a Monopoly game piece from out of the tangled mess. He swam to shore with his fist clenched around the little metal thimble. He could barely move his arms and legs. The most he could do was little flutter kicks, because each time he tried to stretch out, it was like a new set of forks started pricking him. The pain turned to something else by the time the water was shallow enough that he could touch the bottom. It was like each spot on his body was filled with the kind of pain that comes when you cry. An aching, throbbing kind of pain that leaves the surface of your skin and finds channels to your heart, and then leaves your heart and pumps grief back out all the way to every edge you have. He could see the landscape differently once he got close to shore. The girls were by the pig pen, sitting with their knees folded beneath their nightgowns. The pigs were at the fence, bodies pressed eagerly against its slats, small eyes turned toward the ocean. They were clearly waiting for something. He dragged himself out of the water. He knew the air was hot, but he felt cold there on the beach. His body covered in red welts, too weak to stand. He pulled himself as far away from the water as he could and shut his eyes and threw up and cried. He cried like he had as a kid when he was meant to come home by 6 but had spaced out and forgotten about the time. When he'd gotten to the door, his mother had yelled at him and he could see fear in her eyes. All he could think was that it was his fault, that he'd scared his mother, that he'd caused her pain and would never stop causing her pain, not once, not his whole life long. He couldn't stop crying. He would never see the world again except through a veil of tears. He cried like he had when his father died. He cried like he had when Alice told him to move out. Who knew how long he lay on the beach? At one point, he felt a hand holding onto his gnarled fist. He opened his eyes. His vision was still blurry, but his sobs had turned to hiccups. Louisa crouched down next to him. He relaxed his hand in hers, wondering that she had come to hold it, wondering that she, in particular, was here to comfort him. So that's Otis throwing himself away. So I thought I'd finish up the reading with 3 very short chapters that I think get to the heart of pigs' connection to circular economy. These chapters are scattered throughout the novel, and each of them serves as a meditation on what distance allows us to see and what it allows us to ignore, particularly in terms of what it is we throw away. From a distance, the island looked so small that ocean liners moving past described it to their passengers as nothing but an unnamed, uncharted outcropping of rock. Cruise directors announced over loudspeakers that some people said it was the island where the sirens tried to lure sailors to their death. Listen closely, they said, and you'll hear something that sounds like song. From time to time, a half-drunk divorcee jumped into the water and required rescue from irritated sailors. From time to time, passengers gathered on deck to sigh at the dark outline the island made against the orange setting sun. But nobody noticed the trails of refuse that formed a path over the water as the ship steamed on. It was official policy never to look back. It was official policy to believe the world stopped once it could no longer be seen. From a distance, seen from above, the island was shaped like a kidney. It had a wide curved side and a long indented side and two shorter, rounder ends. From sea level, it looked like a perfectly shaped mountain, all of it rising at the same angle to a peak at its very center. There wasn't any control room anywhere, no master plan for a magic island that served as the world's dump. It just was, and people just knew about it if they thought about it at all. And ships just brought their stuff there as if by instinct. Plastic bottles because no one trusted tap water, fur coats that were splashed with paint, television screens that simply weren't flat enough, weight loss and weight loss competitions, mothers' wedding dresses that daughters had no interest in wearing, toothpaste samples from the dentist, love poems written by boyfriends long ago. The ships brought it and slipped it into the water when no one was watching, and once in the water, it vanished completely. Spools of film that no one remembered how to process, dolls with broken arms, income tax information that went back more than 7 years, half-eaten cupcakes, half-read novels, shrunken sweaters, chipped teacups. From the outside, with perspective, it all looked smoothed and beautiful. The island's perfect peak, the sun forever setting or forever rising and never stuck at a punishing noonday height. But on the island itself, where even the idea of perspective did not exist, everything arrived in its particularity. From the island, it was the ships that seemed a single entity. What was discarded was unique. Who discarded it was not. And then to close up the reading, I'll read one more from a distance chapter. The distance between now and when the pigs first arrived was impossible to calculate. For millions of years, their meals were few and far between. There wasn't much garbage to be had for most of those years, and what there was mostly emotional. They nibbled on broken hearts and exiled kings, but everything in households was mostly used and reused until it turned to dust. And what wasn't used was buried close to home. Forget about clothes gone out of fashion. Forget about plastic. There wasn't any excess. The pigs didn't even realize they were hungry. Somewhere along the way, though, things started changing. Who knows exactly what caused the change? What was it that prompted someone to start wrapping goods in paper? Maybe the age of exploration? Maybe the Industrial Revolution? Whatever it was, one day some moldy biscuit washed ashore, and then a bolt of cloth, and then furniture abandoned along the Oregon Trail. When plastic was invented, the stream turned into a river. The pigs ate almost constantly now. Good thing they never got full. Sometimes their jaws ached from overuse, but they were ravenous, always. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Johanna. That was great. In your second to the last one, you asked about if nobody thought about where their trash goes. So I thought we'd do another poll at this point before I hand it off to my colleague, which to the audience, do you know where your trash goes? Have you thought about where your trash goes? So yes, I know my community recycles what I choose to recycle. Somewhat I pay attention, but I don't know. And then, no, I really don't know. So it'd be great to get a vision from our audience as to what you think and whether you've thought about it before this session. So go ahead and put your polls in, and let's see the results. If we're getting some results. Yeah, things are always a little bit sometimes. Here we go. Well, we have an audience that's pretty well versed. Not too many people have no idea, and that's good. So we have a well-informed audience. That's great. Thanks everyone for participating. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Alicia and to the panelists. Alicia Marseilles is the Director of Innovation here at the Solutions Service. She leads our efforts on bringing the benefits of circularity to underserved populations. Take it away, Alicia.
Hi, Mark. Thank you. Johanna, thank you very much for that. The work in the book is incredible and ironically very closely aligned to a lot of the work that we've been doing at ASU over the past 5 years or so with the City of Phoenix in partnership around the Risen program. And I'm really excited to also have a complete rockstar panel of all females here. So I'd love to start introducing the rest of the panelists. So today we have with us Ginger Spencer, who's the Director of Public Works from City of Phoenix. We have Sarah Axelrod, the Director of Sustainability for Beverage and Packaging for North and Central America at Ball Corporation. And we have Jessica Gonzalez, the Program Officer in Economic Development at Local Initiatives Supporting the Support Corporation. Sorry about that, Jessica. So really excited to dive in deep to this today. If you guys want to quickly first give a quick 1-minute overview in regards to an introduction of yourselves. Want to start with Ginger?
All righty. Thank you, Alicia, Mark, and Johanna. I enjoyed hearing about the book. It was very thought-provoking and just very glad to be a participant today. I'm Ginger Spencer, the Director of Public Works for the City of Phoenix. Our Public Works Department, we are responsible for solid waste, flood control, fleet, and facility operations on behalf of the City of Phoenix. We're the 4th largest department in the city, but the bulk of what we do is our solid waste operations, where we're responsible for collecting residential garbage and recycling and organics from our Phoenix residents. So we do have a goal of achieving a 40% diversion from the landfill by December 31st of this year. And then we also have a zero waste goal, which is to achieve 90% diversion from the landfill plus by the year 2050. So thank you again for having us.
Jessica, do you want to go next?
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel. And hello, everyone who's watching. I am Jessica Gonzalez. I am the Equitable Economic Development Program Officer at Local Initiative Support Corporation in Phoenix. LISC for short is the national organization with a community focus. We support people in local community development groups. As a staff member at LISC, I help identify priorities and challenges in collaboration with people and places, delivering the most appropriate support to meet local needs. And so I'm here today to talk about what that means, and very grateful to be a part of this panel.
And Sarah.
Hi, everybody. Sarah Axelrod. I'm the Director of Sustainability for North and Central America in our beverage packaging part of the business. So as many of you may or may not know, to be honest, I certainly didn't know the breadth of what Ball is involved in before I started. Ball Corporation is based in Colorado, and it's a 140-year-old company. You all might know Ball for the mason jars that I'm sure more people are using during this exciting quarantine situation. A lot of canning has been happening. Unfortunately, Ball doesn't actually make the mason jars anymore. We are responsible for close to 50% of the world's aluminum cans. So looking at essentially every major beverage company you can think of is using a Ball can in some capacity. So when we think about the circular economy, and a big part of my role is looking at, okay, the inherent sustainability benefits of the aluminum can, right? It's infinitely recyclable. It is made of a material that can be a can over and over and over and over and over again, and can go from a consumer's hand through the recycling and back on the shelves in less than 60 days, which is really exciting. So when we look at opportunities to move, into a more circular economy and away from things like single-use plastic, et cetera, aluminum is a really fantastic solution. So from my perspective, I'm looking at both, of course, promoting aluminum and aluminum solutions to part of this circular problem, as well as looking at, the bigger picture around recycling and putting policies into place to help enable the circular economy from the private sector. Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. I learned recently from a colleague who spent 15 plus years in the aerospace industry. He's an engineer. He said that it's actually more complicated to make an aluminum can than an airplane engine, which makes you wonder why we put them in the garbage can sometimes versus recycling. So really excited to be here. Two exciting concepts we're going to talk a lot about that are interwoven through the novel are in regards to a linear economy, which is what we currently exist in, and the concept of circular economy. And so for those of you that don't know, a little level setting, a linear economy is this notion where we extract raw materials, they're shipped all over through different supply chains, products are made, they're distributed through stores, online and offline now, and we utilize and use the products, and then they're disposed of, right? And so there's different mechanisms of which they're disposed of. We have recycling programs, we have landfills, and now we also have what we would call water fills, as we see a lot of materials ending up in the oceans. And so the idea of circular economy is, how do we change the relationship that people have to materials? How do we extend the life cycle of those materials, keep them in the economy longer, which have a lot of different types of environmental and economic potential benefits. And then also a lot of the work that we've been thinking about and talking about at ASU is you can have perfectly circular economies and supply chains, but if you don't incorporate the human and the social element, what that could mean. And so I was really excited to see in PIG, there was a lot of conversations in regards to the human element of this. And so hoping to dive into that and draw some of those insights out of our panelists today. And so I'm going to start with asking all of you to describe your role and what it means in relationship to circular economy and the work that you're doing today. Feel free, anybody, to jump in first.
So I'm happy to start. When we talk about circularity, I think, Alicia, your point was right. It really is a spectrum in the way, sort of the linear economy that we think of going to a fully circular economy, right? This is a full systems approach. And so when we think about circular, it's where are the opportunities and what can we pull from the private sector to push towards a more circular approach, right? So for us, that means looking at ways to increase recycling rates, increase recycled content, making sure that we are working with our suppliers to capture some of that recycled content, and looking at piloting closed loop systems for some of our packaging materials. So for me, that's how we're thinking about it, and really, pushing towards what we are calling real circularity, as opposed to, methods of recycling that maybe aren't fully circular.
I know that was music to Ginger's ears.
Well, I'll go ahead and go next. Yes, definitely music to my ears. Thank you, Sarah, for that. So from a City of Phoenix standpoint, when it comes to circularity, so just a little bit of history. So we've been doing recycling for more than 30 years. And about 10 plus years ago, we started talking about sustainability. And then through our work, however, with Arizona State University, about 5+ years ago, we started hearing about the circular economy. And so we were able to attend conferences through the US Chamber of Commerce in Washington, DC that they hosted that talked about the circular economy. And we also became connected with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and became the first city and university in the nation, actually throughout the world, to become a member, joint members of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So we're very proud of that, and that opened up our eyes to what is the circular economy. And so before, it really was what Alicia discussed earlier, that whole take, make, waste, right? We make items, right? We make products, we purchase them as consumers, we use them, and then when we're done, we throw it away. And then that's when our folks come in and we pick it up and we take it to the landfill. Or for those items that could be recycled, we would send it to our recycling plant. So we want it to be focused on cradle to cradle, right? Reduce, reuse, repurpose. And so we really focused our items on how can we use innovation to repurpose this waste and to see trash as a resource, right? As opposed to waste. And so that's what circularity, building a circular economy for Phoenix is all about. And so we've been able to partner with Arizona State University. We've been able to partner with businesses and artists and just innovators to create these innovative solutions to deal with our waste. And so we're all for it. Thank you.
I think Jessica's back on also. Jessica, or we'll give her a few minutes here really quick. I forgot to mention, this is definitely, we want it to be an interactive webinar. So please feel free to type in questions as we go through this for any of our panelists and author included. So please feel free to do that. Jessica, are you online? Not yet. Okay, so we'll keep going here. And this is for Johanna. In the earlier part of the presentation, you mentioned that when you wrote this, circular economy was not something you had heard of and before this ASU book reading. And so again, the irony that it became such a central theme, I think, is what lit up Mark's eyes, and he came back to all of us at the office and was like, oh my God, I found this book. You guys have got to check this out. And so if you could describe kind of what inspired you to think of this idea of waste and create the centralized theme and some of the consequences that come with that in the circular economy.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to talk about that. So I've been thinking about this question quite a bit, just thinking about the ways in which pigs overlaps with circular economy. And so I thought I'll just tell you a lot of the different sources that went into imagining the novel. So I first started writing pigs the morning after I saw an episode of Criminal Minds in which a serial killer fed his victims to pigs. So that's the first place. But then as I started writing, I was also feeling super, super frustrated with all of what felt like unnecessary waste that my kids were bringing home from school. So their backpacks would be full of papers that seemed as though the material could have been included on a single piece of paper, or they were, you know, bringing back so much uneaten food. And it was just very frustrating for me that even the act of going to school was creating so much unnecessary waste. Around that time, we got chickens, which was like a great way to dispose of their uneaten food, and is sort of, I think, where part of where I was, the idea for the pigs came from. But at the same time, we had moved recently from the city of Walla Walla to the county of Walla Walla, where I still live. And there was no curbside recycling in the county. And because we are somewhat disorganized, instead of making regular trips to the recycling center, we would just put all of our recyclables on our back porch, and they would just grow unbelievably quickly. And so every day I would have to look at all of the waste packaging that the products that we bought came in. And it just really started me thinking about how much we dispose of. and how much we are able to ignore when we don't have to look at it. I started writing the novel really seriously in the summer of 2014. During the summer of 2014, there were a number of news stories about buses that were filled with migrant children in Southern California that were surrounded by adults who, if not violent, were performing violence. And it was extraordinarily distressing for me to think about those children, how vulnerable they were, and the ways in which those of us who are not vulnerable do not cherish the members of our world who are extraordinarily vulnerable. So all of those kind of ideas were percolating around in my head while I was writing Pigs. And then towards the end, after I'd written a couple drafts of it, it suddenly dawned on me that there was another source, which is a film that I saw as part of the Seattle Human Rights Film Festival, probably in the mid-90s, a Brazilian short film called Isle of the Flowers that follows a tomato plant through its life cycle from seed to producing fruit, to that fruit being purchased in a grocery store, to the fruit being decided that it was not good enough quality and so being thrown away and eventually ending up in a landfill. And once it ends up in a landfill, we see that the landfill is open to a herd of pigs to make their way over and feed off of the edible waste that's in the landfill. And once the pigs are done, it's opened up again. And this time it's opened up again to women and children in the surrounding areas to then look for food. And I think more than anything that film was kind of at the heart of the novel.
I was muted. Oh, the woes of Zoom. The next question we actually had for the panelists is ironically very similar to a question asked by Dane Whitaker, one of the gentlemen online that's listening. And so I'll just take it from him here. It's a great question and pretty thought-provoking, and thinking about solutions to waste in the circular economy, social aspects included. Are these solutions going to be more so cultural, technical, or maybe a combination of both?
Hi, Alicia, I'm back. So sorry about losing some connection. Jessica at LISC. I'll tackle that question. The solutions for a circular economy, and one of the most important critical reasons why LISC is looking at this, is we do believe that there is a systemic and also policy-driven impact on our communities. And so with that, we understand the impacts that these policies have on people and what that has to the livelihood of their existence. And kind of what we're seeing in Pigs reflects that. We see a lot of language around fences, which I see as borders, which then come into play of what safety looks like. And safety is not just safety in violence, it's also safety in the situations that you're brought up in. So in regard to the youth and them not remembering kind of where they had come from and now coming into this life that's all they know. And so many kids in our neighborhoods are growing up in those situations of not truly understanding why their lives are the way they are, but also not seeing that as a negative factor, right? They're taking lessons and learning. And so the approach that we take is around community wealth building, and how are we looking at these communities and allowing them to see and envision their place in that economy and their place in building their own, sustaining their own wealth. And there's a lot of different factors, investing in financial literacy and financial capabilities of equipping folks with the resources that they need. And so the reason why I say it's cultural is because most of the system doesn't communicate in a way that they can receive it. And so that's where communities of color are most impacted, and where if you don't have the tools that that economy has set forward to make you successful, you probably aren't going to get there. And so those tools could be access to the English language. It could be access to even digital literacy. Even for myself, having an alternative vehicle like a cell phone so I can continue with this conversation. And so those things are not equipped to everybody, are not available to everyone. Even with folks answering the question around were they even aware of circular economy, or even if their city recycles. These are access points that showcase that there are limitations in how we communicate. And so for us, it is very much a cultural lens of how do we build equity and how do we create access points so folks are equipped to make the changes that they need to see in their neighborhoods.
Jessica, I love that, and I'd love to follow up. You know, something that we talk a lot about, right? Not at all surprising coming from a private company, is a lot of the solutions we're looking at are very technical, right? They're policy changes, they are you know, eddy currents at MRFs. I mean, very technical solutions to this problem. That said, something that, you know, I think I love about my role being a little bit more external facing, and something that Jessica both and Johanna touched on that is something I'm grappling with is, you know, exactly as Jessica said, that consumer education piece. You know, what I spent my entire career in sustainability, and most of it in the food system. And, you know, something that I loved about working in the food system was that it was both so personal and so micro, but also from a global perspective, very macro. And I think the circular economy is very much the same, right? It is, you know, to Johanna's point, it's waste, and part of her inspiration for writing this book was she saw it piling up on her porch from, you know, recycling. And, you know, so often we've essentially culturally trained ourselves not to see the waste that we are holding in our hands and putting in a recycling bin or throwing away, or, you know, throwing stuff out of your car when you're at the gas station. I mean, things that it's just something to get rid of. And, you know, something that I want to bring from my time in the food space is, right, it is personal. It is a piece of trash or recycled material or something even, you know, with economic value that you hold in your hand every day, that, you know, how do we create, to Jessica's point, access points and consumer education to make that feel intuitive and feel accessible. And so something that we're really looking at from a consumer education perspective.
And I'd like to add on to that as well, to both what Sarah and Jessica said. So from a city standpoint, we really try to use a multi-pronged approach when looking at solutions. And from an innovation standpoint, I'll give you 3 examples, and I think it covers both the cultural as well as the technical. And just, you know, sometimes it's just partnering, right? And coming up with those public-private partnerships or public-public partnerships just to get the word out and to come up with solutions for our residents. But 3 examples I'll give you. So one, when I was listening to Johanna and listening to everything that was thrown away, most of those items are recyclable, right? Can be reused, repurposed. And it gets back to Sarah's point about really just thinking about how we personalize the waste. And if we're just thinking about it, like, instead of just throwing it away, right? Is there something else I can do with this? So if it's the plastic bottles, if it's the food waste, if it's the clothing, you know, all those things can be repurposed. So one example is we work with Goodwill. We work with them on repurposing mattresses, right? Those were big, bulky items that go to the landfill. They take a lot of space and they're there forever. And we said, what can we do around mattresses? Well, basically, Goodwill came up with the technology to repurpose mattresses. And we were able to take it and make, you know, doggy beds. It's an example of that. And so that's one example there. We also partnered with Goodwill, where right now, you as a resident, you can go to any Goodwill location and drop off your clothing, right? Or your household goods and that sort of thing, those things that are showing up in the landfill. Well, but maybe it's just not that easy. Maybe everyone can't make that concerted effort to actually go and drop off their goods that they no longer want. And so we partnered with Goodwill, where we said, okay, we'll create a pickup program. All you have to do is send a text, get on the web, or even call, and we will come and pick up the waste from you. So from a cultural standpoint, just access, right? Making that available to individuals. We also partnered with Arizona State University and our Parks Department to say, okay, we have a green organics program. We're taking this yard waste, we're turning it into compost, but how can we give it back to communities, right? And then from an environmental standpoint, if we use this compost instead of regular liquid fertilizer, will we reduce water usage, right? Will it be better for the environment? So we were able to take the compost, right? Apply it to city parks, located, throughout the entire city. And then where ASU came in, they came in and did the research for us to show that the benefit, the environmental benefit of using the compost, so that we could take that back and communicate that with our elected officials. And then the last thing is plastics 3 through 7, the difficult to recycle plastics. Well, we partnered with a young lady, Priyanka, and a company called Renewology. And we basically said, here, we'll give you our plastics. What can you do with it? And so she created the technology. She actually did a pilot in Salt Lake City, Utah, where she's able to take the plastics, turn it into new plastics, and with our approach, actually turn it in to fuel. And so we can use that fuel to, to fuel our solid waste trucks. So that whole circularity there. But that we were able to find out about this company through our partnership with Arizona State University. We had an incubator for innovation, and that was one of the things that came out of there. But she used the technology, right, to be able to come up with that solution. So it really is everything. And then lastly, the point that I want to make on that is we recently went out to all of our residents, 1.5+ million people, and we wanted to find out how they felt about recycling. Was recycling important to them? And we just said, oh, we'll put out a questionnaire, we'll put it out on our web, and we'll just wait for responses. But what we found out was every community, every council district was unique. And so we really partnered very closely with our elected officials to figure out what is the best way to get this word out and to get feedback from the community. And so that's where that cultural aspect really came into play. And what we found out is for some communities, just having the information online worked well. But for other communities, what we need to do was go door to door, right? And talk with individuals, to partner with them, and to really just try to figure out what was important to them, but getting out and connecting with individuals. And so, some folks, it was taking care of the illegal dumping, and then that created the connection so that we could have this conversation about recycling and circular economy and sustainability. So that's what I would add to that discussion, is using that multi-pronged approach.
So it sounds like it's a balance, almost a mix of responses from Jessica, Ginger, and Sarah, that across the board, it's probably a mix of the cultural and the technical, right? And how do you enculturate it? How do you get people to see the value of the materials, the waste, how you engage them in the process? And then I think the other piece is, and Ginger kind of hit on some of the innovative projects that the City of Phoenix has been working on, the partnerships, and it kind of made me also start to think, how do we shift people's, how do we shift paradigms in terms of what people think is innovative? Because to us at ASU, we thought that the park turf was extremely innovative. Like, this is amazing. How can we take the City of Phoenix compost and figure out what are the kind of the cost benefit analysis and the trade-offs of putting that on the parks instead of fertilizer, right? And to some innovators, they're going to say that's not innovative, right? So how do we shift paradigms and getting people to think differently about what is innovation? How can innovation solve problems, complex problems? How to do that through partnerships? And then obviously technology is going to be a key piece when you're working with materials. And so I'd also like to ask Jessica and Sarah, it was a question, another great question from the audience, to describe any innovative projects that you're perhaps also working on in this space or thinking about working on.
So our local office is really looking and exploring on how do we address the lack of resources that are available to businesses. So really looking at the economic ecosystem and identifying what is continuously being a stopgap for businesses. And nothing more than ever has really spotlighted that, like the COVID-19 pandemic, of really highlighting and really spotlighting where businesses are struggling with. And a lot of that is financial capabilities. And not necessarily because they're doing it the wrong way. They're doing it what works best for them and what works best for their business at that time. And so we accept that not every business is going to scale, and they exist to create wealth for their own families. And so some innovative things that we're thinking about is, what does that paradigm look like of obtaining wealth, obtaining capital, to incubate, your vision, if it's a restaurant or if it's a dry cleaner or any type of service-based business. And then how do we help empower that? And one of the strategies that we're looking at specifically around community wealth building is helping to tackle the traditional economic development systems that reinforce poverty in communities experiencing lower incomes. And one of those models is looking at cooperative formation. And so we're in the beginning stages of researching what that looks like. How do we introduce cooperative formation training or resources or access points for businesses who wish to transition into that? So we can begin to look at and help them frame, how do you leverage your resources? How do you cost share? How do you sparse out all those things that could be burdens in your business? And what would it look like if cooperatives were existing now during this time, and how they're able to leverage dollars so that way they can continue to move forward. And so we're looking at neighborhoods that are traditionally ignored. Our work is on our light rail transit-oriented line, which covers Phoenix, Mesa, and Tempe. And so looking at those corridors and looking at what is happening along them, and then how do we build a stream that brings in a circular economy framework, that brings in and leverages resources that would be perceived as trash, and now bringing that into the cost of goods of a business and alleviating that from their balance sheet and alleviating that from their costs. And so those are areas that we're spearheading and kind of moving towards and taking those steps of what that looks like.
So we've submitted a couple proposals with LISC and Jessica's organization, as well as a few other organizations in the Valley, the Arizona SBDC, the SBA program, and looking at, can we use circular economy as a driver in underserved communities to create cooperatives and generate wealth from a producer-based standpoint versus typically they're in service-based industries. And so kind of innovating what business models could look like around circular economy. Sarah, there's definitely things happening at Ball.
Yeah, absolutely. So, our innovation and the way we're thinking about this is, really looking at pilot programs and opportunities and how we can prove that the model works, but then how we can also, use our global footprint and perspective to help scale those solutions. So I think Ginger's perspective on this is really about partnership is incredibly important. So, we work very closely with the Recycling Partnership on, several of their city grant programs. We're looking at opportunities here in Colorado as well as all over the country around, increasing curbside recycling and access. And, both helping support grants from a financial perspective, but then also really being hands-on in, how can we help capture and again, communicate and increase that education piece. I think also from a, thought leadership perspective around circular economy and how we understand the circular economy. This is something that our European team has spent years on. And, I think Europe is a little further along in this discussion than we are here in the US. And, one of the things that they found is really transparency and accuracy in reporting and measurement. And so, I'm a sustainability person and will be the first person to say, life cycle analyses are really helpful tools, but they are, sometimes methodologies are not the most accurate, and that's fine. And they're, very wonky and these things. And so something that we've done, and a lot of times these, a life cycle analysis of a product or a system doesn't measure the circular aspect of that product. So, you know, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has done some really fantastic work around measuring circularity. And so, you know, incorporating that into a life cycle analysis discussion, we're actually about to release, hopefully in the next several weeks, a life cycle analysis that we did along with several third parties, and, you know, maintaining that credibility outside of Ball, if you will, really comparing the, and not just a ball can, but the various substrates, and incorporating recycling rates and incorporating that idea of circularity into this life cycle analysis. So comparing, you know, a PET plastic bottle to an aluminum can of the same size, to cartons to glass, and really then seeing, and I think this is where the LCA gets really interesting, and then running sensitivity analyses on, okay, what happens if we increase recycled content of these materials, and what happens if we increase recycling rates, and what happens if we, you know, recycle this can or this bottle 6 times versus 8 times. And so really, I hope setting a foundational baseline to have these conversations really at the highest levels, both at the city and federal. You know, I think that's great. And the only other thing I will mention, as we're talking about innovation, another really core way that we think about circularity is designing products that are indeed circular, right? And it seems silly and it seems intuitive, but the something I don't know, many of you have seen, we're about to launch the aluminum cup, which I think a can without a top, it kind of looks like a red Solo cup. But as we think of ways to, you know, reduce our impact, and again, just like the can, these cups can be recycled an infinite number of times. And, you know, for the Super Bowl this year, when Miami committed to the Super Bowl being zero waste, they brought in the aluminum cup as their alternative cup solution, which is really exciting. So things like that, you know, really all over the board, from thought leadership work to local partnerships to, you know, designing new products that fit into this model. We're really trying to pressure test and see what works to help scale. Oh, Alicia, I think you're on mute again.
Sorry. I think you mentioned some really great points, all three of you here, in regards to measurement specifically, and thinking about the life cycle of materials and products, right? And what that looks like in their value. And oftentimes we think about the human element or the discard, we think about it in terms of the production side, but on the disposal side, or the social, the human side, we often think of those as externalities. So it's interesting to start to think about how we could start to measure, not just on the production side, but the cost of, on the life cycle side of actual disposal, but then also what is the cost to communities also, and thinking about, I know this comes up from the municipal side when they're looking at developing new infrastructure or programs, the concept NIMBY, for those of you that are familiar with Not in My Backyard. And oftentimes a lot of facilities or things related to waste and recycling end up in lower income or industrial areas. And so thinking about communities and in relation to waste and products, how do we measure the full impact across the life cycle, not just in terms of production again, but disposal, and also the community side. And I think some of it goes back to the book. There was a section where Luisa is sorting trash one day on the island, and she finds a pair of glasses, puts them on, and thinks they work. Why would somebody throw these away, right? And so for our panelists, I'm thinking about, you know, the value of what we throw away, not just in terms of the product and the production, but actual things like disposal costs. And how do we measure that and the impact that it's having in communities? Any thoughts from the audience in regards to that, or how do we examine those relationships or the measurements, the reuse side of it? That was a loaded question, but anyone want to take a stab?
I'll take a stab at it, Alicia. So yes, life cycle cost analysis. That is so important. And I got so excited, Sarah, when I heard you say that. So we would love.
I'll send it when it's public.
When it's public, yes, please share. Really, measurement is what allows us to make the business case, right, for investing in building a circular economy. Our elected officials, they want to know, what is the return on investment? Why should we do this, right? So we've had to make that case, but it's just not financial. I know everyone's heard people, profit, planet. So we measure, right, what we're doing. So I know we have a 36% diversion rate, right? That's where we stand. I know that we're trying to get to 40%. But then also being able to make the case, what is the impact that this is having, right? So actually, I wish I had it so I could pull it on the screen, but I'll share the information with you. We're reducing our carbon emissions, right? By more than 500,000 metric tons. We are basically saving enough trees just by the amount from our diversion that would be enough to cover over 578,000 acres. We are basically, the impact would be like reducing 102,000 cars from off the street. From energy standpoint, it's saving 1.8 billion kilowatts and over 76 billion gallons of water. And so, I mean, the measurement is so important, but then we got to take it a little bit further, because sometimes those numbers are big and it all sounds great, right? But what does that mean to me? And so I think we need to measure it, but at the same time, we need options for our residents, right? I always think I would love to be able to like just take my makeup, right, and return it back to, you know, Bobby Brown or Walmart or Walgreens, whoever, you know, that would be great, as opposed to, well, maybe there's not an option for it, so I have to throw it in the garbage can once it's done, you know, just those little things. Even plastic bags, something as simple as that, you know, knowing that if I have a plastic bag, you know, but if I do, that I can take it to a Lowe's or to a grocery store, right, and return it and know that they're going to use it to make patio decking, right? Isn't that cool? Or even to use it to throw away the things that do belong in the trash can. So I just think being mindful of those things, but having options for our residents as well. But definitely it helps us make the business case so that we can continue to make those types of investments.
You know, one thing I'll add to that, and you know, I think Ginger's point about being mindful is an excellent one. And you know, this might be my optimism coming out here, but there is something about this particular crisis that I actually think will accelerate this understanding of not just, you know, the environmental impact of this issue, but also, you know, the social, I mean, the full ESG factors, right? The environmental, social, and governance issues as it relates to the circular economy. And I think what we're going to start to see is, and at least what I hope we start to see, is that the line will become blurred between, you know, sustainability activity or corporate, CSR activity, and just the way companies do business. And, you know, these things, because of this acceleration, because of this understanding, you know, there's the potential for impact is only going to accelerate. And that to me is very exciting. There was a great A.T. Kearney study that came out a couple of weeks ago that, you know, showed this really remarkable increase in people's awareness of their environmental impact. And, you know, we've seen that, right? We've seen that over the years of consumer understanding of their environmental impact and their willingness to pay for more environmental solutions has gone up, right? That's not news. But what is news about this is they looked at it not just 2 years ago, not just a year ago, and this year in February, but they looked at it again in February, in mid-March as this crisis was accelerating, again in the beginning of April, and again in the middle of April. And what they saw, it just, even in those couple of weeks, was a sharp increase to the point of 8 out of 10 people are saying that they are willing to make purchasing decisions and change their own behavior based on their environmental impact and what they perceive to be their impact. The reason being is they're starting to tie their personal health with the health of the system and the health of the environment. And that, that to me is a really exciting moment that, I hope we don't lose when we come out on the other side of this.
And for Johanna and Jessica, it'd be great to have you both weigh in on, thinking about how do we examine or look at and consider people and the relationship to waste in different communities and the importance of that, especially, yeah.
So, one of the things that popped out, bringing it back to pigs, and I'm grateful that this is Johanna and I's question, is that, when Andrew, he's one of the little boys, the only little boy of the 4 kids, when he finds Otis, right, and he's contemplating on whether he's going to feed Otis to the pigs or not, and that's real, right? And one of the ways we started this conversation was around humanity. And I think overall, humanity has gotten used to perceiving reality in the accepted way. And the accepted way is what society has shared is the way of how we run things. So through an economic development lens, that is traditionally doing things and releasing capital and forming things because this is the way it is. And so when we think about neighborhoods and the work that LISC is doing is we're flipping that and we're allowing community members to determine what is the perceived reality, allowing them to share and be a part of the decision making of what their community is. And I'm going to correct myself, not allowing, but taking a step back as an institution and having the intentional ear of understanding what their needs are, and then supporting those organizations on the ground to help deliver that to those community members and work in coalition with them. And so I think Ginger had mentioned this as well, as the importance of partnership and what does intentional partnership with your community look like, and how do you bring those voices forward? Because if Andrew had the ability to even have the thought to not go forward with that and never even had to think that that was a decision he had to make, and that he was able to work with the adults and showcase this is a human being. Imagine how profound that would be as life-changing for Andrew. And that's who we're looking at. We're looking for Andrews and working with Andrew to build that framework and to put him in the forefront of those decisions.
That's really lovely. Thank you, Jessica. I guess I sort of was thinking maybe also about that moment in the novel and thinking about Otis and the way that he kind of charges in and thinks he's just going to be like the savior for the kids. And he doesn't really listen to them. He doesn't really believe anything that they're telling him about their situation. And because he doesn't listen to them, he ends up, the costs for him are great. And so by the end of the novel, when he actually is able to help, it's only because he has really done the work to understand what's going on with them. And I think that that's really important to remember, that it's the importance of listening. And then I guess I was also just thinking about, questions about recycling that are in the novel. And one of the things that I was happiest writing wise was kind of finding a solution to the situation in the island, which is about finding a use for discarded refrigerators. And so those refrigerators kind of form a path across the ocean. And it just I just kind of was thinking what can we do? What can we do with all of this stuff that's washing ashore? And it was just so satisfying to find something to do with it that was beneficial to the island's population.
Yeah, thank you, both of you, and brought some light. I think there was a quote in the book that really also addressed the systemic issues that are pretty imperative. And the quote is, "From a distance, the world might have laughed at them, but it would have stopped laughing when it realized the system that kept the world in balance was broken too. And it didn't have a backup plan either." And so thinking about that quote in terms of the overall like system, right? The whole supply chain, if you think about recycling and the community included in that supply, the value chain, if you will. And, you know, and especially now we had the China ban before, and there was a lot of confusion with the China ban from the public perception as to what that was, you know, when China said we're not accepting recyclables anymore. And now with COVID, there's been even a little bit more confusion as these systems have changed. And so it'd be interesting from Sarah and Ginger also, you know, what type of work or things are you doing to listen to that system or overcoming and thinking about or predicting these systemic disruptions?
All right, I'll go ahead and jump in first. So dealing with the China ban and dealing with COVID, the one thing that I love about working for the city of Phoenix is we're government, right? And government is known for being risk adverse, but we're a government that embraces innovation. And so, you know, when things get tough, we see that as an opportunity, right? And so when the China ban happened, the first thing was, okay, well, now we have all these tighter restrictions. We'll just have to send all of our plastics to the landfill, right? It's like, wait a minute, that's not acceptable. That's the easy answer. And I don't want to criticize anyone who made that decision, but that was the easy answer. It's like, let's dig a little deeper here. And so what we found out was, wait, well, plastics number 5, they have value. So let's, you know, pull those out from the other plastics and we'll process them. But then let's put a call out to see if anybody has any great ideas on what to do about the other plastics. And so, you know, from a systemic approach, the approach we took in Phoenix is we don't have all the answers, but we want to listen, right? And so what we did is we put out what we call a call for innovation. And it's a sexy way of saying a request for information. And that's what we've done. And we did that working in partnership with our Community and Economic Development Department. And that's how we were able to come up with all these great ideas by putting the call out, right, to others, saying we don't have all the answers. We don't know what to do. But we're willing to listen, right? And we want to hear those great ideas from you. As far as COVID is concerned, we've actually seen an increase because before the waste was going, like the residential waste, we're picking up what you're throwing away at home, but then you'd go to work, right? And then whatever you discarded there, you'd get rid of it at work. Or when you went to the restaurant, right? Whatever you didn't eat got discarded there. Well, now everybody's home. So we saw nearly a 20% increase, but it was across the board. It was an increase in garbage, it's an increase in recycling, and an increase in compost. Oh, and by the way, everyone's doing a lot of projects right now. So we've seen an increase in our bulk trash, right? But there's no surprise there, because if anybody's been to a Lowe's or Home Depot, there are plenty of people there. And so, but what we're trying to do is say, okay, how can we take advantage of COVID, this situation, right? People are at home. How can we get the message about recycling out to them? Let's not just put everything on pause, right? But let's use this as an opportunity. And so our creative folks, our zero waste team, they came up with a new website called Recycle Plus, and they're getting videos out and information. So we're basically taking advantage of these difficult times and of these challenges and seeing it as an opportunity.
I think that's exactly right. You know, there is an opportunity here. And I think from a systemic perspective around COVID, you know, as it relates to policy, you know, there is right here in the US, we have bottle bills in 10 states. And generally speaking, in those 10 states, the recycling rates in those 10 states are higher. That is certainly not to say that every policy is perfect. And something that we have seen with COVID is 8 out of 10 of those states have suspended their programs due to a number of reasons, right? Health, safety, et cetera. And so really looking at this as, as Ginger said, an opportunity to re-examine some of these policies and re-examine and support some of these systems. And, from our perspective, hopefully, support a system, a really effective future system of recycling. And I think that's across a myriad of policies, both, and it's something, again, about recycling that I love and incredibly challenging, but makes my job really interesting, is, right, there are an infinite number of players and an infinite number of solutions and policies, and right, from the federal level, from the state level, and all the way down to the local municipality, right? This is something that, when COVID happened and the Department of Homeland Security guidelines said, okay, recycling based on these guidelines is deemed essential, but really it came down to the local municipality on whether they considered it essential or not. And 81 municipalities suspended recycling. And that number has dropped off and people have started to open back up. So, using this really incredible data that's coming out of this moment to, again, allow us the opportunity to re-examine some of these systems, I think is pretty phenomenal. One thing I will say about China and National Sword, for those on the phone who haven't taken the time to watch it, I hope everybody has a little extra time these days, sitting at home. If you need a break from the COVID drama, there's a really phenomenal documentary that came out on Earth Day, on the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, called The Story of Plastic. And it came from the producers around The Story of Stuff. So it's, it's an hour and 15 minutes. It's on Amazon. I highly recommend it. It's a really, ties directly into the Pigs novel and thinking about, if we're just shipping trash across the ocean, is that actually recycling? Is it actually getting rid of it? And what happens? And what is the global social impact of that? So highly recommend.
Thank you. We're down to our last 5 minutes, and I want to thank all 4 of you for sharing your insights today, your viewpoints, the work that you're doing, whether it's in your organizations, the municipality, the business, and Johanna, your book and your work. Pretty incredible, pretty excited to have all of you on here. I think the last question would be for all 4 of you, any advice that you would have for our audience that's a much needed, perhaps part of the change in accelerating circularity and circular economies.
Thank you, Alicia and ASU, for this opportunity, and all the sponsors who contributed to making this effort happen. I think some advice that we would have is really take a look at your neighborhood, really have conversations with folks, but not just your neighbors, but the businesses that are operating there, and really get to know what they're experiencing. If there are systems like they're giving you plastic straws, get to understand the system that is getting them there, or maybe it's because they're not aware of other systems that could provide them alternative options. So I think that's the number one thing, is to really connect and root yourself there, and really extend past. So if you traditionally go to one particular type of restaurant, maybe venture to something else that is different, a supermarket that is run by your refugee community, and really get to know also those cultural divides and those cultural differences of how they approach recycling and the economy and all of that. So for us, and thank you so much again, and have a great rest of your day.
I'll echo that thank you from Jessica. Really, really appreciate the opportunity to share and contribute, and thank you to everybody who joined. I think my piece is probably not a piece of advice, but more a call to action here. As we've talked about, an infinite number of permutations and an infinite number of challenges and solutions. And back to Ginger's point around partnership, partnership and collaboration is so crucial. This is a systemic problem and it needs systemic solutions. So, that is, if you have an idea or something you want to innovate on or something you want to talk about, look me up on LinkedIn, shoot me an email. I am thrilled to collaborate. So thank you so much.
So thank you to ASU and to all the sponsors and to everyone that was on the panel today. I really enjoyed this discussion, and just like the ladies said, we are stronger together. So it's about collaboration and partnership and working together. Find a way to get engaged, whether it's through ASU, through one of our organizations, get plugged in. There's the Recycling Partnership, there's the Closed Loop Fund. There's just so many great organizations out there. Get in touch with us. We'd love to work with you. So thank you.
And I'll just say,
Johanna,
I'll add my thank you also. And I think, I think as far as creative work goes, I think it's just so important to just keep looking at the world as closely as you can and to think about what it is you surround yourself by and the products that you surround yourself by, where they came from and where they're going, and to just look closely. So that's for all.
Also, yeah, thank you. And I want to make sure to let everybody know, Johanna, that your book is available from your local bookseller, as well as our local bookstore here, Changing Hands. And thank you to Changing Hands, the Piper Center for Creative Writing, and the Center for Science and Imagination for partnering and sponsoring this event. So that's all we have, and I think we're right on time. So thank you all for joining, and also to our guests for joining us.